Virgo, God saw every tear you hid in silence and will restore your suffering heart. Most people think Virgo is strong, and she is, but not in the way it seems. Virgo's strength doesn't stem from the absence of pain. It stems from the perfection with which she has learned to hide the pain. Over the years, she has developed an invisible inner architecture to keep everything she couldn't process aloud. The disappointments she swallowed with a smile, the injustices she absorbed in silence, the nights she cried without anyone knowing, because Virgo believes deep down that showing the wound is showing weakness. And Virgo doesn't allow herself to be weak. But this belief comes at a cost. The cost is that it accumulates, it compresses, it organizes the pain with such competence that, from the outside, everything seems fine. But from the inside, she carries a weight that no one has seen, no one has named, and sometimes not even she herself can properly explain. The invisible mechanics of this script is this: Virgo doesn't hide pain because it's cold. It hides it because it learned very early on that its feelings bothered, overwhelmed, or simply weren't validated, so it became its own emotional censor. Virgo's inner laboratory isn't just analytical, it's also the place where it keeps everything it doesn't know where to put. The great revelation, the emotional turning point of this video, is that this ability to silence one's own pain, which Virgo uses as protection, is precisely what prevents restoration from happening. Because what is not seen cannot be healed, and what is not healed silently shapes every choice, every relationship, every sleepless night. And here comes the element that transforms this content into something greater. The idea that there is something, call it the universe, call it God, call it whatever you want, that saw, that did not forget, that did not discard any of those hidden tears as insignificant, that Virgo's silence was never invisible to the field that created her. The emotional arc of this video ranges from acknowledging hidden pain to the liberation that comes from understanding that she never needed to prove she deserved to be restored, because the process was already underway, even when she couldn't see it. You probably think you know Virgo. You probably think you know what she feels, or that she doesn't feel that much. After all, she always seems fine, doesn't she? Organized, functional, with ready answers for other people's problems while her own remain on hold, waiting for the right time that never comes. But what if I told you that this isn't strength? Or rather, what if I told you that it's a form of strength that came at a much higher price than anyone around Virgo realized? Because there's an inventory inside Virgo that no one has seen, a record of everything she felt, absorbed, and kept without anyone knowing. The nights she cried softly, the disappointments she swallowed with a smile, the specific loneliness of someone who is everyone's safe haven and has no safe haven for herself. And the most disturbing thing about this video isn't Virgo's pain. It's the idea that this pain was never invisible, that every tear hidden in the silence was seen, recorded, and that a restoration is underway, not as a future reward, not as a result of sufficient effort, but as something that was already being crafted while Virgo was still in its mid-weight. What this video will show you may change the way you understand what you've experienced. It won't soften it. It won't simplify it. It will name, precisely, carefully, what Virgo carries inside and what is about to change. Stay until the end. What comes next is for you. There's one thing Virgos do so well that people around them rarely notice. It's not organizing, it's not analyzing, it's not solving other people's problems with that quiet competence that everyone admires in them. It's about feeling pain and not letting it show. And when I say this, I'm not talking about coldness. I'm not talking about insensitivity. I'm talking about something much more sophisticated and, in a way, much more painful than that. I'm talking about a skill learned over years, perhaps decades, of compressing what hurts until it fits into such a small space that even it can no longer find it. If you're a Virgo, or if you know one closely, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a layer of you that no one can reach, not because you didn't want to be reached, but because at some point, a long time ago, you learned that showing the wound was risking being left with it even bigger than before. And that lesson stuck. Now think about this. Do you remember the last time someone asked you how you were doing and you actually answered? Not the automatic, "I'm fine." Not the, "It's hectic, but I'll manage," you say, while already thinking about your next task. The last time you opened up about something that truly hurts and let another person get close to it. Hard to remember, isn't it? And it's not because you don't have anything to say. You do. Virgos always do. The problem is that the path from pain to the surface has become increasingly complicated because Virgos aren't just sensitive, they're analytical. So when a feeling arises, before it reaches the mouth or the eyes, it goes through a filter, and this filter asks, is this rational? Will this bother someone? Will this make me seem weak? Is this proportional to what happened? And often the feeling doesn't go away. This is Virgo's inner laboratory, a place of absurd intelligence, capable of examining every emotion with almost scientific precision, but which over time has used that same precision to discard what simply needs to be felt. Do you know what happens to what gets trapped in that lab? It accumulates, it takes up space, it weighs you down in ways that Virgo can't quite explain, because even she doesn't know where that feeling of tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep comes from, that heaviness that's there even on days when everything seems to be working. Because Virgo has learned to function through pain. It has learned to be efficient even when fragmented inside. And that's what makes it so impressive to others, and precisely what prevents it from being truly seen. There's a hidden inventory inside you. Things you've lived through, absorbed and kept without anyone knowing. That disappointment you swallowed because it wasn't the right time. That injustice you let pass because it wasn't worth fighting for. Those nights you cried softly, or not even that, because Virgos sometimes don't even allow themselves the luxury of tears. And the next day you woke up, made your bed, made coffee, and carried on. No one counted those tears. No one knew those moments. No one saw the true cost of you being who you are to everyone. But what if I told you that someone saw it? And it is precisely here that everything changes, because the question that lingers now is not a small one. It's not, how do I improve? It's not, what do I need to correct? Which, incidentally, are Virgo's favorite questions because they feel comfortable solving them. The real question is deeper. If I carried all this alone for so long, who really saw what was inside? It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. It won't tell you to stop feeling. It won't ask you to be different from who you are. It starts from a place that Virgo rarely receives. The recognition that the depth with which you feel, the seriousness with which you carry everything, is not an excess to be corrected. It's the starting point for something that goes far beyond the self-criticism you've turned into a routine. Because Virgo knows better than anyone the feeling of always building, always adjusting, always trying to reach a point of clarity, and never feeling like you've actually arrived. This book is for that moment. For the moment when the reader is still experiencing active discomfort, still recognizing patterns, still processing, not after you've resolved it. Now, while you're still in the midst of it. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, when was the last time you felt something deep and didn't tell anyone? No need for details. I just want to know if this resonates with you. Now, I need to tell you something about Virgo's pain that is different from most people's pain. Most people have one event, a breakup, a betrayal, a loss with a name and date, something they can point to and say, this is where it started. Virgo rarely has that event. What Virgo has is an accumulation, one layer upon another, so subtle and so gradual that it never seemed urgent enough to stop and say, "This is hurting me." Imagine a backpack. You put in a stone, a small one, almost nothing, then another, and you keep walking because each stone alone is nothing, and Virgos hate complaining about things that seem small. But a day comes when you try to run, and you can't. And it's not because you've gotten weaker, it's because the backpack has become impossible to carry, and you didn't realize when that happened. This is the kind of pain Virgo carries, diffuse, without a clear address, without an obvious culprit, which makes it even harder to name. And Virgo needs to name things to be able to deal with them. That's how their mind works. It needs precision, clarity, exact words. And when the pain doesn't have exact words, it remains suspended, unresolved, not released, just stored. And here comes the paradox that Virgo lives with inside. She, who is so precise with everything, with work, with obligations, with the feelings of others, has within her a wound that she herself cannot properly diagnose, which is a subtle form of torture for a mind that functions like hers. This inability to name one's own pain, it has a cost that Virgo knows well, even if they've never put it in those terms. It's the cost of not knowing exactly what to heal, of arriving at the end of the day with that feeling of heaviness without origin. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, was created for this specific moment, to help Virgo develop the inner discernment that they use so well in the outside world, but rarely direct inward with compassion instead of criticism. It's not a vague promise, it's a tool for clarity, the kind that Virgo truly values because it goes straight to what matters, and this content may disappear. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. Now I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, not to me, but to yourself. When was the last time you felt that the pain you were experiencing was, deep down, your own fault? Not in an obvious way. Virgos rarely think, "I deserve to suffer," but there's a more sophisticated version of that which they masterfully practice, transforming everything that hurts into a problem to be solved, into an area for improvement, into evidence that they haven't arrived there yet, as if pain were a diagnosis of a defect, not a natural human response to everything she had experienced. And that's where Virgo's most unsettling paradox comes in. She is the most dedicated person there is, the one who strives the most, the one who demands the most from herself, the one who least forgives her own mistakes. And yet, perhaps precisely because of that, she tends to believe that the suffering she feels is proportional to the flaws she hasn't yet corrected. That when she finally gets everything right, the pain will go away. But that's a trap, because Virgo's list of corrections never ends. She herself guarantees it. And while the list continues, the pain is never allowed to simply be what it is. A legitimate response from a heart that feels deeply, carries a lot, and rarely receives in the same proportion that it gives. The craftsman who spends hours polishing an object doesn't look at the marks on his own hands. And Virgo polished so much, so many relationships, so many projects, so many people around her, that her hands are marked in ways she herself didn't stop to see. What if pain isn't a flaw? What if it's actually evidence that Virgo feels with a depth that most people will never reach? This perception that pain is not a Virgo's fault, but the mark of extraordinary sensitivity, is exactly the kind of inversion that transforms how she relates to herself. And it is this level of understanding that the book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac, Sign to a Life of Purpose, offers not a mirror of flaws, but a lens that reveals the strength that has always been behind Virgo's suffering. Her depth is not a problem, it is the ground where purpose grows. This content is available now, but may be taken down. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. Now I'm going to tell you the most important part of this entire script. Those nights you cried without anyone knowing, views, those times you held back tears because it wasn't the right time, because it wasn't appropriate, because you needed to be strong. Views. That moment when you felt completely alone, in a room full of people, and you smiled anyway and kept going and did everything that was expected of you. Seen. I'm not using figurative language here. I'm talking about something that goes beyond psychology and enters a level of reality that Virgo, with all its rationality, sometimes resists accepting, but which, when accepted, changes everything. There is a field of consciousness that doesn't function like the humans around Virgo did, that didn't get tired of hearing it, that I don't dismiss as an exaggeration, that didn't ask her to be simpler, lighter, easier to bear. That registered every hidden tear with the same importance she gave to solving everyone else's problems. And you know what's most disturbing about that? The idea that this record didn't remain static, that what was seen was preserved, not as a dead file, but with an active intention to restore it. There's an emotional physics to this that Virgo will understand better than anyone. What has been suppressed accumulates potential, what has been silenced holds pressure, and what has been intentionally kept, not as a burden, but as a promise, has a force waiting for the right moment to be released. You are in that moment right now. This idea that what you experienced in silence wasn't lost, but kept with purpose, is the turning point that Virgo rarely receives. And the book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, explores exactly this territory. The connection between what Virgo carried inside and the spiritual destiny that was being woven while she carried it. For Virgo, who always believed she needed to deserve everything she received, this book offers something different. The perspective that some things come not as a reward, but as grace. And grace doesn't wait for you to be ready. It arrives first. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. But here's a detail I need to tell you about Virgo and restoration, because otherwise you'll miss exactly what you're trying to find. Virgo has a specific pattern that works against her at this point. When something starts to improve, when the weight starts to decrease, when life starts to organize itself in a way she didn't expect, not in dramatic ways, she doubts it quietly, with that inner voice that's an expert at finding what's still wrong in what's becoming right. This won't last. There's still a lot to resolve. I didn't do enough to deserve this, and so she doesn't recognize the healing because she expected the healing to be different, clearer, more definitive, more proportionate to how much she suffered. And Virgo's restoration rarely comes like that. It comes gradually. It comes from below. It comes in small reconfigurations that only make sense when you look back after some time. A fracture that begins to calcify doesn't appear healed from the inside. It looks like the same bone in the same place. But it's rebuilding itself, silently, with an intelligence that doesn't need approval to function. Virgo, who has spent her entire life being an expert in silence, sometimes doesn't recognize when the silence around her has changed in nature. It's no longer the silence of abandonment. It's the silence of reconstruction. Realizing that restoration was already happening while you were still in the midst of pain, this changes Virgo's relationship with their own internal process. And the book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, provides practical tools for Virgo to learn to recognize the signs that something is changing, not just the big milestones, but the small reconfigurations that they usually dismiss as not being perfect enough. For someone who has always been brilliant at diagnosing others, it's time to learn to do the same for themselves, with the same precision, with much more compassion. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There's one last thing I need to tell you, and this is the most important thing of everything that's been said here. You no longer need to prove that you deserve to be whole. I know Virgo doesn't like this phrase, because it sounds vague, like those things people say without understanding the weight of what it truly means. But I'm saying it with surgical precision, which is the only way Virgo accepts hearing things. You dedicated time, energy, intelligence, and care to everything and everyone around you with a generosity that many people around you didn't even notice. Because Virgos do it so discreetly that it seems natural, it seems easy. But it isn't. It never was. And the cost of that remained within you in the form of tears that no one counted, pains that no one named, nights whose number only you know. And all of this is enough, not as a negotiation, not as an exchange, not as an equation where you add up the years of effort and divide by how much is still left. It's enough simply because you are who you are. Virgo grew up in a world that demanded more of her than was fair to ask, and she gave. With rigor, with dedication, with that seriousness that comes from someone who understands that things matter. But there comes a point, and perhaps this is that point, when the cycle changes direction. When what was given begins to be returned in ways she didn't expect. A flower that grew in concrete didn't need perfect conditions to exist, but it deserves finally a garden. This garden isn't in some distant future where you finally corrected all your flaws and arrived at the perfect version of yourself. It's being cultivated now, with exactly who you are today, with your marks, your scars, with the extraordinary strength of someone who has learned to survive in silence and who can now finally learn to bloom aloud. God saw every tear, and he didn't forget a single one.